Let me tell you something wild. Over 2,000 years ago, in the crowded city of Athens, there lived a man who set the whole town on fire, not with torches or weapons, but with his beauty, his charm, and his endless scandals. People whispered about his affairs in hushed voices, gossiped about his outrageous parties, and feared his power. This man was accused of mocking the gods during drunken ceremonies, seducing queens in foreign lands, and strutting through Athens like he owned the place. His name was Alcibiades, and once you've heard his story, you'll understand why he was called both a genius and a disgrace. Athens adored him. Athens hated him. And in the end, Athens was nearly destroyed because of him. That's what you're going to discover in this story. Not just boring dates and battles, but the whispered secrets, the affairs people were too shy to say out loud, the scandals that left families furious, the shocking betrayals that made whole nations shiver. This isn't a clean or polite story. It's messy. It's full of passion, gossip, and danger, because that's exactly who Alcibiades was. So sit back. Imagine Athens around 450 BCE. Narrow streets buzzing with merchants selling olives and wine, voices echoing in the market, boys wrestling in the gymnasium, and marble temples shining white against a summer sky. And in the middle of it all, one young man is walking by, already impossible to ignore. That's where our story begins. Alcibiades was born rich. His family name was ancient and noble, his house filled with servants, marble, and wealth. His father died when he was very young, but this didn't leave him weak or helpless. If anything, it gave him more attention. He was raised by powerful guardians, including one of the most famous thinkers in history, Socrates. Yes, the Socrates. The same old man we learn about in philosophy classes, known for asking impossible questions. Imagine being taught by someone who made every student squirm, under the weight of why and how. But Alcibiades wasn't a quiet, bookish boy. Far from it. From the very beginning, he showed off. There's a story about him biting another child during a fight. When scolded, instead of looking embarrassed, he snapped back, "Yes, I bit him. But I did it like a lion, not like a coward." Bold, fiery, arrogant, there was Alcibiades even as a child. He had everything: a wealthy family, brilliant teachers, and confidence that dripped from every move he made. Oh, and one more thing, he was beautiful. Not just good-looking, legendary. His golden hair curled just so. His shoulders were broad. His posture made him look like a young god dropped down from Olympus to wander the streets of Athens. People gossiped about his looks constantly. It wasn't fair. While others sweated in the marketplace carrying goods or practiced speeches for years, Alcibiades only needed to walk past, and heads turned. Beauty is power. We all know it, even if we don't like to admit it. In ancient Athens, where people worshipped the human body and put statues of perfect muscles on every street corner, it meant even more. And Alcibiades knew exactly how to use it. As a teenager, rumors began to swirl. Some said he had already courted the wives of noblemen. Others said he chased companions at drinking parties. A few even whispered that his teacher Socrates was in love with him, captivated by his youth. Whether those rumors were true or not doesn't even matter. What matters is that everyone believed them. And once whispers start, they're impossible to stop. Alcibiades leaned into it. He wore fine clothes, more colorful than most men dared. He threw parties that stretched long into the night. He laughed loudly, bragged boldly, and strutted confidently. Half the city shook their heads in disgust. "This spoiled peacock is shameless," they muttered. The other half secretly admired him, wishing they had his courage to live without restraint. When Alcibiades married, everyone assumed he would finally calm down. His wife, Hippolyte, was noble, loyal, and patient. But if Athens thought the golden boy would stop chasing pleasure, they were very wrong. He kept filling his days and nights with lovers, laughter, and shameless affairs. Poor Hippolyte couldn't stand it. She headed to the courthouse to file for divorce. Imagine the scene. This respectable woman walking through the agora with servants at her side, her face set in determination. People noticed. Whispers rose. She's had enough of him, but then came the twist. Alcibiades himself stormed into the courthouse, grabbed her in his arms in broad daylight, in front of everyone, and carried her home. The crowd gasped. Some cheered the boldness. Others called it disgusting arrogance. Hippolyte never tried to divorce him again. That single display said it all. Alcibiades was too powerful to be turned away, even by his wife. And this was just the beginning. By his 20s, Alcibiades wasn't just a pretty face at wild parties. He was stepping onto the public stage. He gave fiery speeches in the assembly, won admirers among the young, and positioned himself for leadership. Even as people rolled their eyes at his scandals, they also thought, maybe this man can lead us to victory. But here's the warning sign you need to remember. The very same reckless fire that made Alcibiades irresistible, the charm, the beauty, the arrogance was the same fire that would one day burn Athens. His sexual secrets and public scandals weren't just spicy gossip. They would eventually tear apart alliances, fuel betrayals, and ruin the trust of entire nations. And that leads us straight into one of the most horrifying events Athens had ever seen: the mutilation of the Herms. Picture Athens in the summer of 415 BCE. The city was buzzing like a hornet's nest. Why? Because the whole population was preparing for what they thought would be the most glorious campaign of the century, the Sicilian expedition. This was Athens at its boldest, ready to send its soldiers and ships across the sea to conquer Sicily. It was a gamble, but the Athenians believed it would make them the masters of the Mediterranean. And who was one of the loudest voices pushing for this huge adventure? You guessed it, Alcibiades. He dazzled the crowd with speeches. He leaned on his perfect looks, his self-confidence, and his charm. He made going to Sicily sound like an exciting party: riches, glory, and endless fame for Athens. While other politicians urged caution, Alcibiades painted pictures of parades, victory songs, and gold pouring into the city. People roared with approval. But then, just before the fleet was set to sail, something happened that turned Athens upside down. Something so shocking, so disgusting, so horrifying, that Athenians thought the gods themselves were against them. One quiet night, under the cover of darkness, sacred statues across the city were attacked. These weren't just any statues. They were Herms. Picture men's heads carved in stone, mounted on squared pillars of marble, with an erect symbol of fertility carved boldly at the front. These weren't decorations. They were sacred guardians, placed outside homes, temples, and crossroads, believed to protect the city from bad luck. And in one night, nearly every single Herm in Athens was mutilated. Their faces smashed, their noses cut off, their male parts hacked away. It was horrifying. Imagine walking through your neighborhood in the morning and finding every single street statue desecrated and defaced. People screamed. Priests shouted. Citizens wept. To Athenians, this was not just vandalism, it was a terrifying omen. Surely the gods were furious. And if the gods were against Athens, how could their massive fleet possibly succeed in Sicily? Now here's where scandal kicks in. The city immediately began yelling, "Who did this?" And all eyes turned, not surprisingly, to Alcibiades. Why him? Because he was already infamous for throwing wild late-night parties. His enemies claimed he mocked sacred rituals when drunk. People whispered about blasphemy in his house, imitations of holy ceremonies, twisted into games of sex and wine. Whether true or not, Alcibiades had built such a scandalous image that the moment anything sacrilegious happened, people pointed fingers in his direction. Think about it. Beauty plus arrogance equals suspicion. The richer and showier Alcibiades became, the easier it was for rivals to say, "See? He thinks he's above the gods too." So when the mutilated Herms were discovered, political enemies leapt on the chance. They accused Alcibiades of masterminding the violation. Others insisted his drinking companions were guilty. Some whispered that Alcibiades had done it deliberately to scare the people before the campaign. Imagine the fury. Families crying, religious leaders demanding justice, politicians shouting for punishment. But there was a problem. Alcibiades had just been named commander for the Sicilian expedition. He was, in the eyes of many, the brilliant young general everyone believed could lead Athens to victory. To lose him, even for trial, seemed like asking Athens to fail. Alcibiades didn't deny the charges meekly. Of course not, he was Alcibiades. He demanded an immediate trial, wanting to clear his name while the facts were still fresh. His enemies stalled. They knew if he went to trial right then, with the excitement of Sicily at its peak, the people might forgive him. Instead, they delayed the trial until after the fleet had already sailed, sending Alcibiades away while the accusations lingered like rot. Still, Alcibiades boarded the great expedition. Hundreds of ships, thousands of men, drums pounding, sails wide, the city cheering Athens trusted him to bring them glory. But behind those cheers, poisonous whispers remained. Everyone knew the Herms had been mutilated. Everyone knew Alcibiades' name dripped with scandal. And sure enough, just as the fleet reached Sicily, a messenger ship arrived. Orders from Athens. Alcibiades was to leave the army and return home immediately to stand trial. Here is where Alcibiades showed his true colors. He didn't obey. Oh no. Instead, he slipped away. He abandoned his ships, outwitted the messengers, and vanished. The man at the height of his power, the golden general favored by Socrates and cheered by the people, simply deserted. Back in Athens, the trial went on without him. Alcibiades was found guilty in absentia, condemned for desecrating rituals, accused of mocking the gods, and declared an outlaw. His property was seized, his name was spat upon, and statues of him were smashed or in one case, bizarrely, fitted with new inscriptions mocking him. Athens had gone from Alcibiades, our glittering savior, to Alcibiades the disgusting blasphemer, almost overnight. To Athenians, the mutilation of the Herms wasn't just vandalism. It was a horrifying sign of moral decay, the very core of their city's values being mocked. And when Alcibiades' name was tied to it, all his sexual gossip, all his scandals, all his arrogant struts through the agora, suddenly became pieces of a much bigger puzzle. Had Athens put its trust in a man completely without piety, loyalty, or shame? The irony? Alcibiades didn't slink into hiding. Far from it. He reappeared in Sparta, of all places, ready to spill Athens' secrets to its greatest enemy. And what happened next made the Herms scandal look like child's play. Alcibiades began weaponizing his personal charm, sexual allure, and political wit to destroy his enemies, even if that meant betraying his homeland. When Alcibiades slipped away from the Sicilian campaign to avoid trial, he didn't run home to hide. No, Alcibiades never did anything small. Instead, he went to Athens' deadliest enemy, Sparta. Imagine it, the glittering playboy of Athens, the man accused of mocking the gods, suddenly strolling into the land of harsh soldiers, short haircuts, and iron discipline. Normally, if an Athenian showed his face there, he'd be cut down on sight. But Alcibiades wasn't just any Athenian. He came offering secrets. And oh, what secrets he shared. He told the Spartans every little detail about Athens' great Sicily plan. He warned them when ships were moving, what strategies would be used, even what political divisions were boiling back home. The Spartans, who usually said little more than yes or no, must have stared wide-eyed as Alcibiades strutted around their barracks, pouring out knowledge. He even advised them, fortify a post at Decelea, in Attica. It will hurt Athens like nothing else. They followed his advice, and it worked perfectly. For Athens, it was a disaster. But Alcibiades wasn't just charming them with military tips. His reputation for seduction, his most dangerous weapon, came with him. Among the whispers in Sparta was a rumor so juicy it never went away, that Alcibiades had taken up with the Spartan queen herself, Timea, the wife of King Aegeus II. Now we don't know if that affair truly happened. Ancient gossip was often more smoke than fire. But in Sparta, which prided itself on discipline, obedience, and control, the idea that Alcibiades had seduced the queen spread like lightning. And here's the shocking twist. Some historians say the child she bore during that time was whispered to be Alcibiades' son, not the king's. Imagine that scandal, a foreign playboy possibly fathering a prince of Sparta. True or not, the accusation was enough to scorch Alcibiades' name. From then on, King Aegeus hated him, and Alcibiades eventually had to flee once again. But this was Alcibiades' pattern. One city's curse was another city's opportunity. When Sparta grew too dangerous, he simply slid into Persia, where local rulers welcomed him with open arms. Why? Because Alcibiades had a gift. In every city, he made himself impossible to ignore. In Persia, he dressed in royal silks, learned the local customs, and dazzled the satraps who governed for the king. And of course, the whispers of seduction followed him there too. Stories spread about Alcibiades surrounded by luxury, women, servants, and endless wine. Wherever he went, talk of scandal moved with him, like a cloak he never took off. Think for a moment about this man's life. Most people, exiled from their homes, hunted by enemies, would keep their heads down. They'd try to survive quietly. Not Alcibiades. He turned exile into a new stage. Instead of laying low, he made his betrayals unforgettable. He didn't just switch sides once. He did it repeatedly, like an actor changing costumes. Athens, Sparta, Persia, no matter where he went, Alcibiades carried two weapons far sharper than any sword: his charisma and his appetite for desire. By the time he left Persia a few years later, even his enemies had to admit something shocking. Wherever Alcibiades went, he made himself not just useful, but irresistible. He could turn danger into opportunity, betrayal into advantage. And yet, for all his brilliance, his scandals never disappeared. If anything, they multiplied. If he fought for Sparta, he was accused of seducing a queen. If he lived in Persia, people muttered about him indulging in lavish, immoral pleasures. And here's the strange truth. Alcibiades seemed to love it. He thrived in scandal. He wore his reputation almost like armor, shining it so bright that people couldn't look away. Scandal was no longer something that simply happened to him. It was something he crafted, something he turned into a tool for power. But sooner or later, scandal has a way of snapping back. For Alcibiades, the wild zigzag between Athens, Sparta, and Persia would eventually bring him home again. And when he returned, Athens welcomed him, not with anger, but with open arms. That's right. The very city that had cursed his name, broken his statues, and declared him an outlaw now begged him to return as a savior. Why? Because, somehow, in all his betrayals, Alcibiades still shone brighter than anyone else. The Athenians couldn't resist. Not even then. By the early 410s BCE, Athens had been battered by war. The Great Sicilian Expedition, the massive campaign Alcibiades had once championed, ended in disaster. Thousands of soldiers died, ships were destroyed, and Athens, once so sure of its own greatness, was humiliated. It was like watching a champion boxer knocked flat in front of everyone. And then came the whispers. Who could save Athens now? Who could turn luck around? Believe it or not, one name kept rising to the surface: Alcibiades. Yes, the very man they had sworn as an outlaw, the man accused of tearing down sacred rituals, the man who had defected to Sparta and whispered in the Persian courts. That same man. At first it sounds insane. Why forgive a traitor? Why call back the man they had chased away? But this shows you something about Alcibiades. His charm was so magnetic, his brilliance so blinding, that even his worst crimes faded in the face of hope. Athenians were hurting, desperate, and dazzled. And Alcibiades knew how to step back into the spotlight. When Alcibiades finally returned, it wasn't as a humble exile begging forgiveness. No, that wasn't his style. He came back like a king. He sailed into Athens surrounded by friends, admirers, and soldiers. Crowds flooded the docks. Some must have cursed under their breath, remembering his betrayals. But far more cheered. To see him again was like seeing a hero come down from Olympus. His golden hair, flowing robes, confidence in every word, it was intoxicating. The city voted to lift his exile. His property was restored. Once again, Alcibiades was parading through the agora in fine clothes, striding into the assembly, laughing with friends, drinking with companions, and whispering to lovers. The same old scandals returned in full force. He never stopped chasing pleasure men, women, parties, gossip. But now the people who once scorned him didn't dare say much. They needed him too badly. With Athens desperate, Alcibiades was given a command once again. He led fleets into the Aegean, won key victories, and filled the city with hope. For a brief shining moment, it looked like Alcibiades really was the savior Athens had dreamed of. Each success he scored seemed to wipe away an earlier betrayal. The city sang his praises once more, as if the nightmares of the Herms, the scandals of the mysteries, and the rumors of foreign queens had faded into smoke. But Alcibiades was still Alcibiades. He couldn't resist showing off. His ships weren't just ships, they were decorated with brightly dyed sails. His soldiers didn't just fight, they marched with flair. Even when handling politics, he dazzled as much as he strategized. It was impossible to separate the warrior from the showman. Of course, scandal wasn't finished with him. During one festival, Alcibiades returned to Athens carrying magnificent gifts. He marched proudly to the temples, claiming to honor the gods. But for some, it was too much, too flashy, too arrogant, too much like a man trying to outshine the very deities he pretended to serve. Critics muttered that Alcibiades hadn't changed at all. Still reckless, still lustful, still convinced that rules were for other people. And they were right. His private life was just as wild as before. He didn't restrain himself now that he had been given power again, he flaunted it. Old rivals in Athens shook their heads and waited. Sooner or later, they knew, Alcibiades' arrogance would catch up with him. He had returned as a savior, but the cracks in the foundation were already showing. For a brief time, Athens shone again under Alcibiades. Victories mounted. Spirits lifted. People walked the streets a little taller, as stories of Alcibiades' brilliance spread. But everyone knew his pattern. Scandal always followed him like a shadow. When he was young, it was biting other children and chasing affairs. As a man, it was desecrating rituals, seducing queens, and abandoning fleets. Could this time possibly be different? The truth was, Alcibiades himself couldn't change. He thrived in chaos. He loved adoration too much to keep his head down. He enjoyed the gossip, the gasps, the scandals. They kept his name burning. So as soon as he was strong again, his rivals prepared their knives, metaphorical and literal. And sure enough, Athens' golden sun would soon be betrayed, and once again fall from the pedestal he had built so high. For a little while, Athens once again believed Alcibiades was their savior. He had returned in glory, delivered victories, and walked the streets like a golden boy forgiven by the gods themselves. But if we've learned anything about him, it's this: Alcibiades couldn't stop feeding on attention, admiration, and scandal. He loved it, relied on it, and in many ways lived off it. Not everyone was enchanted forever. His rivals, the politicians who had suffered his comeback, sharpened their voices like knives. Even ordinary citizens started whispering again. The old Alcibiades was still there, too flashy, too reckless, too hungry for pleasure. Rumors about his private life never stopped. He was said to be chasing love wherever he saw it, men and women alike, as if the city itself were his personal playground. For a while, success protected him. But then came another stumble, one that left Athens questioning whether their prodigal son was once again pulling them toward disaster. On campaign, Alcibiades suffered setbacks. His boldness at sea ran into misfortune, and enemies claimed his arrogance was to blame. For Athenians, who were starting to pay dearly for years of war, failure was no longer charming. Success excused Alcibiades' appetite for luxury, his shameless flirtations, his endless parade of lovers and admirers. But when success faltered, those same habits became fresh evidence of decadence. "He spends more time with bedmates than with strategies," muttered his rivals. Fair or not, the gossip spread fast. Soon accusations resurfaced. He had betrayed the city before, hadn't he? He had mocked the mysteries of Eleusis, hadn't he? He had seduced a Spartan queen, hadn't he? Whether every scandal was true or embellished by jealous tongues didn't matter anymore. Scandal, like smoke, clung to him. And Athenians, weary of war, began to see scandal as poison. Some argued that Alcibiades' sexual secrets, his dangerous appetites and reckless affairs, were not just private flaws. They were symbols of the arrogance eating Athens from within. It wasn't long before Alcibiades, once again, saw the writing on the wall. His enemies had gained enough ground to bring him down. Facing anger at home, he abandoned Athens yet again, slipping away before his trial. You might think this pattern rise, scandal, flight would finally break his confidence. But no. For Alcibiades, scandal was the stage, and scandal without an audience meant nothing. He wandered to Thrace, then back near Persia, changing allegiances like a man changes outfits. And wherever he went, the pattern followed. Political whispers entangled with stories of his seductions, his mistresses, his charm. In Persia, satraps welcomed him, entertained by his company as much as his military advice. People said he surrounded himself with expensive courtesans, spending gold as though it was water. In Thrace, stories claimed he still turned heads just walking into a hall. Even as his power waned, the sexual secrets of Alcibiades trailed behind him like perfume, unforgettable long after his victories faded. By the late 400s BCE, Alcibiades had burned through allies and enemies alike. His dazzling rise had dimmed, and whispers of his past, his betrayals, his lovers, his scandals haunted him. In Athens, enemies still spat his name like venom. In Sparta, hatred lingered because of the rumors with the queen. In Persia, allies tired of his extravagance. He was too charming to erase, too reckless to trust. One night in exile, Alcibiades faced his final reckoning. He was murdered, some say by Spartan assassins, others say by Persians who had grown tired of his game. And here's the lurid detail, the cherry atop his scandalous life. Reports say he died in the company of a courtesan, cut down as his house burned around him. Even in death, the man of scandal, seduction, and betrayal was remembered not as a general in his armor, but as a lover in the arms of another. When Alcibiades died, Athens did not build him statues of honor. No marble columns bore his name. No temples rose to celebrate his victories. Instead, what survived was something less solid, but far more powerful: the gossip. That's the strange truth. Alcibiades fought in battles, gave fiery speeches, advised generals and kings, and shaped the politics of his age. Yet history didn't cement him as a great general or a wise statesman. Instead, he was remembered as a man of scandal, a man whose beauty and appetites overshadowed everything else. His sexual secrets became, quite unfairly maybe, his most lasting legacy. Think of it this way: battles end, victories fade, Armies march today, but vanish tomorrow. What never fades is the story people tell afterward. And Alcibiades fed those stories so well that they flourished across centuries. In Athens, when his name came up in conversation, people didn't say, "Ah, yes, the man who reorganized the fleet." They said, "Ah, the man who seduced the queen, the man who mocked the mysteries, the man too handsome for his own good." Even sober historians couldn't resist adding in spicy details. Plutarch, who wrote his biography centuries later, filled his pages with anecdotes about Alcibiades' parties, lovers, dramatic entrances, and shameless arrogance. Some of those stories probably grew taller with time, but the fact that they stuck shows how his scandals clung tighter than his strategies. Why did people care so much about his personal life? Because for Alcibiades, pleasure wasn't just pleasure. It was power. His affairs gave him influence, his beauty won him allies, his confidence seduced entire cities. He blurred the lines between bedroom and battlefield, between banquets and politics. Athens was a place where charm mattered almost as much as courage. And Alcibiades was a master of charm, even if it scandalized everyone around him. Of course, not every memory of Alcibiades was playful. For many Athenians, remembering him was painful. His betrayals had cost them dearly. His arrogance, his religious blasphemy, and his switching sides had helped drag Athens into ruin during the Peloponnesian War. The whispers about sacred statues and drunken imitations of holy rituals still haunted older citizens. "That's what happens when you trust a man of scandal," they would say. His secrets weren't only gossip, they had real consequences. Still, others remembered him with admiration. Even his enemies admitted he was dazzling. One writer described him as a man who could outshine anyone, anywhere. To friends, he was unforgettable. To enemies, he was infuriating. To everyone, he was impossible to ignore. By the time later generations told his story, Alcibiades had turned almost mythical. He wasn't a simple general anymore. He was a legend of excess. His name was spoken alongside rumors of love affairs, secret ceremonies, flirtations with queens, and shocking arrogance. And maybe that's exactly what Alcibiades wanted. After all, he didn't seem to live for quiet victories or humble retirements. He lived to burn brightly, to dazzle, to be talked about. If his sexual secrets and scandals carried his fame across centuries, then, in a way, he succeeded. Because even now, thousands of years later, we don't talk about the exact formations of his soldiers or the detailed treaties he signed. We talk about his impossible beauty, his scandals, his whispered affairs, his arrogant grin as he marched through the agora. We still talk about the bite of scandal that followed him everywhere. That was his true legacy. Not swords, not speeches, not victory bells, scandal. Pure, unforgettable scandal. Whose fault was it, really? That's the big question when you look at the life of Alcibiades. Was he the scandalous traitor who dragged Athens into disaster? Or was Athens just as guilty for lifting him up again and again, even when they knew better? Let's be honest, Alcibiades was outrageous. He mocked rituals, partied too loudly, seduced lovers who weren't his to claim, switched sides when it suited him, and strutted around like he was more god than man. He betrayed Athens when it accused him, revealing secrets to Sparta and later charming Persia. That's not just scandal, it's sabotage. If we look only at those facts, it's easy to call Alcibiades the villain who helped destroy Athens. But here's the twist: Athens itself was addicted to him. Think about it. After he fled the Hermes scandal, the Athenians voted him a traitor, smashed his statues, and cursed his name. But when military fortunes fell, they begged him back like a lover who swore they would never forgive, only to fall into the same arms again. They cheered him, restored his wealth, and gave him command. It was as though Athens was powerless to resist the very scandals it claimed to hate. In some ways, Alcibiades and Athens were mirrors of each other. Athens was ambitious, restless, proud, and never satisfied, exactly the same as Alcibiades. Athens loved glory too much, craved attention too much, wanted power too desperately. He was Athens, but in one man. And together, they kept chasing dreams that burned them both down. Look at the Sicilian expedition. It was Alcibiades who fired everyone up with promises of victory. But it was the Athenian people who voted for it, hands raised high in excitement, ignoring warnings of caution. And who paid the price? Thousands of dead citizens, a war Athens could never recover from, and the eventual shattering of their empire. Who destroyed whom? Did Alcibiades sell them false hope, or did Athens happily buy into it because it was exactly what they wanted to hear? The truth is probably both. Alcibiades lived for scandal and admiration, but Athens was just as guilty of feeding the flame. They punished him when his scandals embarrassed them, but they forgave him the moment they needed him. They despised him, they adored him, they could not let him go. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Alcibiades didn't simply destroy Athens. Athens and Alcibiades destroyed each other. One man and one city, two alike in ambition and arrogance to ever end well. Why is Alcibiades still remembered? Why, out of thousands of ancient figures, does his name still pop up in books, plays, and conversations? The answer isn't just his battles or speeches, it's his scandals. Alcibiades fascinates us because he feels strangely modern. He was part celebrity, part politician, part troublemaker. His beauty and charm earned him as much attention as his military skills. He could give a dazzling speech in the assembly by day, then host a wild, whispered, about party by night. He turned his love life into a weapon, shocking and seducing until even his enemies couldn't look away. Doesn't that sound familiar? In an age of tabloids, paparazzi, and gossip websites, Alcibiades would have been front-page news every day. What makes him unforgettable is the mix of contradiction. He was brilliant but reckless, a leader but also a betrayer, a man capable of inspiring loyalty, yet never loyal himself. One day Athens' hero, the next day their criminal. And woven through all of it, the rumors of his sexual secrets, the Queen of Sparta, imitations of sacred rituals, endless lovers, even tales of his death in the arms of a courtesan. These weren't just private affairs. They defined his public image and shaped politics. People judged him not simply for what he did on the battlefield, but for what they thought he did in the bedroom. And here's the deeper truth. Scandal sticks because it speaks to humanity. Stories about Alcibiades remind us that even the greatest empires and brightest generals can be undone by desire, arrogance, and temptation. We remember him not because he conquered Sicily, he didn't, but because he showed how charisma and recklessness can carry someone to the top and back down again. In the end, Alcibiades is a lesson wrapped in a legend. He teaches us that charm can be as powerful as a sword, that gossip can destroy armies, and that a life built on scandal burns brightly but never lasts long. Athens loved him, feared him, cursed him, begged him back, and finally lost him forever. And all these centuries later, we're still telling his story. That, perhaps, was Alcibiades' greatest triumph. Not victory in war, but immortality through scandal.